Yeah, so the 1990s just called and they want their games back. With Final Fantasy VII Remake, Sakura Wars, and now Streets of Rage 4 seeing new releases this spring, the month of April proved to be no fool's joke for old school gamers. As a big fan of all these titles, I never thought I'd see the day where all three would get modern releases, much less in the same month. It just proves that you truly either die a hero, or live long enough to see Axel send city goons flying in the air once again with a fiery grand upper. I've already shared my thoughts on the Final Fantasy VII Remake, as well as the new Sakura Wars, both of which I quite liked. The question now is, will Streets of Rage 4 make it 3 for 3 as far as glorious old school revivals go so far? My history with Streets of Rage 4 is particularly a long one. Yep, get ready for some super long, old-timey talk. Right about now. I actually played the original Japanese version called Bare Knuckle on the Sega Mega Drive, which is the Japanese version of the Genesis. Way back when, just after I moved to Manila for school. To this day, I still remember the delicious scent of garlic fried peanuts wafting through the air as several street vendors hawked their wares just outside my school on my way home. Yeah, those peanuts are no joke. They're really good. Anyway, that's when I saw it. Right there on a CRT television propped by a store window was Streets of Rage running on a game console. Yeah, so that shop was actually a video game rental business where you can pay money to rent time on one of the machines so you can play any of the games that the store had. It was like the old school precursor to the PC Bang or PC cafes that you now see in a lot of Asian countries. Needless to say, I instantly got hooked with Streets of Rage. As a longtime fan of beat-em-up games like Double Dragon, Streets of Rage felt pretty much like an epiphany. I just loved everything about it, from its 3 lead characters, its unique aesthetic, and its over-the-top brawling mechanics. I actually still remember my mind just being blown the first time I grabbed an enemy, did a somersault flip to get behind it, and then finished the poor scrub off with a Mr. Perfect style perfect plex suplex to the ground. I thought, wow, you can do that? I mean, even Final Fight didn't have that move, and this was on a home console to boot. And then there's that soundtrack. Man, that beautiful, hard-thumping club soundtrack. Instead of just being a simple part of the background, Yuzo Koshiro's music was an important part of the whole Streets of Rage experience. A rocking war cry that essentially pumped you up for the fight ahead. I mean, I don't know how Koshiro managed to do it, but he was able to squeeze everything out of that Mega Drive's Yamaha YM2612 sound chip, and orchestrated not only one of the defining soundtracks of that generation, but in the whole history of video games as well. To this day, his work on the Streets of Rage series continues to hold up, which is even more amazing because he did it all on a 16-bit console. Anyway, I loved the game so much that when my younger brother came over to visit me for the summer that year, the first thing I did was take him to that video game rental shop so we could play the game in co-op mode. Streets of Rage proved to be even more fun with 2 people, to the point that playing it solo after that kind of felt, well, lonely. On that day, I would switch between my 2 favorite characters, Axel or Blaze, while my brother stuck with Adam all the way. We went through the game over and over, trying to learn the patterns for the various bosses while nursing our limited continues. I actually ended up blowing through my entire allowance for that week on that day, as we played all the way up until closing time, and then the shop had to essentially kick us out. Get out of here, you deadbeats! On the plus side, we managed to beat Mr. X just as my brother ran out of continues, while I was on my last life with barely a sliver of health left. If you saw our happy faces during the walk back home that night, you would think that we just stumbled upon the secret to world peace. Even after we moved to the United States the following year, Streets of Rage continued to be a part of our gaming lives. One of the first things I did after getting my first job was to save up enough money to buy a Genesis console. In addition to the original Streets of Rage, we also played the heck out of its follow-up, Streets of Rage 2, which boasted even better gameplay, another stellar soundtrack from Koshiro, plus 2 new characters in Max and Skate. About the only thing I didn't like about the sequel was that goofy-looking cover art they used in the West, and the absence of my brother's favorite character, Adam. By the time Streets of Rage 3 rolled in 1994, however, something about it just felt a little bit off. The game was still solid from a technical standpoint and did a good job in adding unlockable characters. Something about it, however, just didn't feel quite right, and as a result, it didn't quite have the same impact that the first 2 games had on my brother and I. The experimental music, well ahead of its time, also wasn't quite as catchy as the soundtrack from the first two games. My brother and I ended up playing the game a few times to finish it, but not to the same extent that we played the first two games. In fact, after a few days, I noticed that my brother was back to playing Streets of Rage 2. It's actually sad because I decided to play Streets of Rage 1, 2, and 3 right before doing this review, and it surprised me just how well Streets of Rage 3 holds up. I actually quite like the game's extra mobility options, and even the music that felt jarring back then actually sounds pretty good today. I don't know if it was just a matter of the system showing its age back then, or maybe we were just expecting too much, but now I actually feel that Streets of Rage didn't quite get the credit that it deserved. In the 2 decades that followed, the Streets of Rage franchise sadly fell off the map. Outside of a fan-made effort that served as an homage to the 16-bit games, the franchise officially disappeared as gaming tastes changed and shooters supplanted beat-em-ups and other old-school genres as the new hot thing. Then in 2018, the long-dormant franchise finally showed signs of life. A trailer was revealed showing Axel and Blaze tearing up the streets once more while sporting a new look and different art style. Streets of Rage was coming back. Granted, I was a bit skeptical. For starters, the new cartoony art style didn't quite grab me at first. The fact that Axel looked like some hobo who just fell off a train made me a bit skittish as well. Then there was the question of whether Yuzo Koshiro would be back to do the soundtrack once again. I was also worried that they might change the gameplay too much in the name of quote-unquote modernizing it, that Streets of Rage 4 wouldn't feel like a Streets of Rage game anymore. I pretty much had this long laundry list of concerns that were constantly punching and kicking inside my head. Then I played the game. All of a sudden, all of my concerns disappeared just like Mr. X's humanity in Streets of Rage 3. The game might look different, but its resemblance to the classic Streets of Rage experience that I know and love felt almost uncanny. While first playing as Blaze and then Axel after that, the movement and feel of both characters eerily felt the same as their old-school counterparts. From the timing of their attacks to even their walking speeds, it almost felt like I was playing the old games. Granted, folks who were not weaned on the older titles might decry their movement for being too slow. If you're a fan of the old games, however, it's like picking up right where you left off all those years ago. Well, minus the ability to run in Streets of Rage 3. Yeah, so the timing just feels crazy good, and I found myself quickly employing old strategies like walking up and down to dodge enemy attacks, or set up a grab, or doing a well-timed jumping attack to help clear extra breathing room during enemy swarms. I also loved all the options that you have after clutching a foe, especially for classic characters like Axel and Blaze, who have a bevy of moves to transition into, whether it be multiple grabs or throws, or even the classic air vault where you can use someone as a stepping stone to launch yourself in the air toward other foes. Further rounding out your toolbox are familiar actions such as back attacks and forward moves like Axel's wait for it. Also making a return are desperation moves that have high priority, but also use a portion of your life bar. These come in different forms for each character based on whether you're pushing the directional stick forward or have it neutral, for example. Due to the reduction of your life bar, you typically only use these desperation moves in a pinch when you find yourself in a sticky situation and need breathing room. At least that was the case in older games like Streets of Rage 2. One new mechanic, however, makes these moves a potential normal part of your offensive repertoire as well. See, if you string together enough attacks without being hit after a desperation attack, you can actually regain the life bar that you lost. It literally turns desperation moves into high-risk, high-reward attacks that you can use not just during emergencies, but as a regular part of your offense as well. In fact, I ended up playing with this one random online Blaze player who was really good and did such a great job using this mechanic constantly while regaining life, and the enemies practically couldn't touch the guy. In fact, I was so fascinated by it that there were times where I would just stand there doing nothing while appreciating this guy go to work. He or she was probably thinking, what's wrong with this dude? But hey, you gotta appreciate an artiste when they're doing their thing. You'll definitely want to be familiar with all the moves at your disposal as the game can get hard at certain points. The enemies themselves aren't too tough one-on-one, but have a tendency of swarming so they can overwhelm you with their numbers. It's not so bad when facing easy enemies, but the game will eventually sick a nice collection of cheap jerks at you, from knife-wielding punks and power-bombing thick lady bikers to the skippy ladies that chuck poison vials and volatile chemistry experiments at you. Let's just say that there's a special place in a certain hot place underground for Margaret, Victoria, and their other toxic sister whose name escapes me at the moment. Maybe I just blocked the name from my memory because the character was that annoying. Leave me alone! Leave me alone! You'll especially want to pay attention, by the way, as many of the regular foes are faster compared to what you faced in past Streets of Rage games. At least that's what it felt like to me. It can be particularly challenging when most of your characters, with the exception of Cherry, have the movement speed of a raging sea turtle. On land, speaking of characters, I absolutely love the selection that's available to you in this game. While I started with my favorite character in the series, Blaze, followed by my next favorite character, Axel, in the following stage, they ended up being my least used options during my first run through the campaign, as I found myself enjoying the new additions instead. In fact, it's quite ironic that my least used character in the original game ended up being my most used character in Streets of Rage 4. Part of the reason is that I truly missed Adam. After the original game, the guy was pretty much reduced to cameos in the subsequent titles. The other reason I love using him in Streets of Rage 4, however, is because Adam is the bomb in this game. The guy just looks really cool and is an absolute hoot to use. After originally playing the role of the slow but powerful high-jumping character in the original game, Adam in Streets of Rage 4 is a lot more balanced and has a sweet playstyle to boot. These include a fun split kick while jumping up in the air, as well as a cool collection of specials such as a Terry Bogard-like power geyser. I especially love how one of Adam's specials uses a wolf-shaped energy blast, which is an homage to the original Japanese version's early builds. See, in the version of that game that my brother and I originally played, Axel was actually called Hawk, while Adam was called Wolf. Yeah, so just a little bit of trivia for you guys. Also joining the fray is the aforementioned Cherry, who is actually Adam's daughter, and serves as the de facto replacement for Skate's quick and nimble playstyle. Speed kills, and Cherry is a perfect example of that, as she can run circles around foes in the game. I did make the mistake of using her for the first time in Stage 4 and found myself constantly falling off ledges due to her forward-moving combos while I was still trying to get used to her. The lesson, as always, is I'm an idiot. One surprise was Bruiser Floyd, who reminded me somewhat of Max from Streets of Rage 2. Floyd boasts some nice power, as well as a special move that fires a huge honking laser blast across the entire screen. He actually ended up being my second most used character, however, due to a couple of reasons. One is his excellent reach and power, which compensates for his slow speed. The other, though, is his ability to grab two foes at the same time and bash them against each other. This move is an absolute godsend in stages that feature a ton of swarming enemies, as you can essentially just move up and down and automatically smack foes against each other, as long as you get your spacing right. If that wasn't enough, Streets of Rage 4 also brings back every playable character from the earlier games in all their pixelated glory. Want to play as classic A power, A speed, and B jump Axel from the first game? You can do that. Want to play as Max in Streets of Rage 2? You can do that as well. How about Zan from Streets of Rage 3? Hey, knock yourself out. The fact that these old characters can be plopped into the new game and still play viably is a testament to how Streets of Rage 4 does a great job in replicating the feel of the old titles. The first time I actually used classic Axel from Streets of Rage 1 here in Streets of Rage 4, I was surprised at how well he played. I was actually expecting his gameplay to feel dated, but it actually felt really good. It also serves as a wonderful Easter egg that honors the longtime fans of the franchise as well. Oh yeah, did I mention that Streets of Rage 4 also features 4-player local co-op? Seriously. The game lets you play with up to 4 characters if you have 4 controllers and 3 other co-conspirators to play with. Even with all the things that the game throws in, everything surprisingly just works. Certain portions might feel frustrating at first. Keep playing, however, and you will eventually see patterns and pick up on nuances that make previously impossible sections and bosses much easier as things click and you start figuring them out. In addition to recognizing enemy patterns, you will also become more familiar with your character's movesets and figure out optimal attacks for certain situations, as well as what moves have invincibility frames that you can use to dodge attacks that would otherwise hit you. Even annoying stage gimmicks that seem designed to make your life miserable can be turned into an advantage that you can use against enemies. The first time I reached the train stage that had barriers that you needed to jump over at the last second to avoid damage, I was incredibly annoyed. Once I figured out the timing, however, I ended up loving the barriers because they ended up knocking enemies silly while I avoided damage. Another stage gimmick involves breaking the glass of an elevator, which is normally dangerous because it lets enemies knock you off the platform. On the plus side though, it also lets you throw enemies off the elevator, which leads to an easy kill. As a result, you can bet your bottom dollar that I break those glass walls anytime I'm playing that stage. The game even sprinkles in secret areas in its story and arcade mode stages that let you challenge a classic Streets of Rage boss in all their CRT glory. This adds an extra layer of interactivity to the game as opposed to just simply moving from left to right. If you're a glutton for punishment, a boss rush mode is available as well. There's even a classic versus battle mode where you can challenge other players one-on-one or as part of a team skirmish. Of course, you can't talk about Streets of Rage without mentioning the music, and this is another department where Streets of Rage 4 excels once again. Yuzo Koshiro and his partner in crime, Motohiro Kawashima, return once again, but they are also joined by other folks who deliver some sick beats of their own. If that's not good enough because you're a purist and you're really pining for the classic background music, well, you can listen to that too by simply going to the options and enabling the retro soundtrack. That's right, you can do it for free without having to pay for DLC. Now whose great idea was that? Even the classic characters can be unlocked for free simply by playing the game as well, making Streets of Rage 4 feel even more old school. If you miss the days when unlockable content simply came with the game you bought, then this is good news for you. As much as I love Streets of Rage 4, however, it also has its share of faults. Picking items on the ground while you're holding a weapon, for example, can be quite annoying as it requires you to be perfectly on top of the item you want to pick up. Otherwise, you will end up throwing the weapon you're holding while picking up an apple, for example. This can be especially frustrating when picking up a whole roast turkey, as you're usually in low health when this happens, and there were times I actually died because I ended up throwing my weapon instead of picking up the item and an enemy hit me in the process. I mean, I guess technically that would be my fault, but it can be hard to be perfectly on top of these items when things get hot and hectic. Online play could also use some improvements. Joining sessions is a bit cumbersome, as you can't just easily drop in or drop out. The game also does not support mixed or combo co-op, where you can combine local multiplayer with online. There appears to be a workaround that involves using share or remote play on the PlayStation 4, but that's an inartful solution to say the least. The story, meanwhile, is minimal and evokes the less is more approach from older games. This time around, you find yourself facing off with Mr. X's devious children, the Y siblings, who have a plan to turn the folks of the city into mindless slaves. I'm sure no one has ever thought of that before. Anyway, it's one of the few old school touches that probably could have benefited from some more modern flair or extra fleshing out. Then again, my concerns about the game are nitpicking at best. From its on-point classic gameplay to its plethora of freebies and unlockables, Streets of Rage 4 is a great example of an old school game done right. Some might say that it relies too much on old school gameplay and doesn't innovate enough, but honestly, that's the point. This is a modern reimagining of the classic left-to-right beat-em-up gameplay that gamers such as myself grew up loving. If anything, its unapologetic and almost stubborn adherence to old school conventions, combined with its attention to detail and homages to past games, tell me that this game was a labor of love for the people who worked on it. At a time when gamers have been conditioned to nickel and diming by developers who take a mile for every inch that you give them, Streets of Rage 4 is a refreshing reminder of game development done right. Honestly, sometimes I feel like I was pretty much dragged kicking and screaming into this age of DLC and microtransactions. Streets of Rage 4, however, is a great reminder that you can punch back and maybe throw a grand upper or two to reclaim those good old gaming days from before. It's just a joy to be able to happily walk those familiar streets once again without having to rage about what was once lost. From one old school gamer, well played Streets of Rage 4 dev team, well played. Now go and remake Guardian Heroes too. As always, if you have any thoughts or questions, please feel free to leave them in the comment section. Apologies, my voice is starting to get hoarse. I've tried drinking water, it's not working. Anyway, this is Tabi Asobi, and thank you for watching.